You kind of got me on this one, Steve. I've been to Wolfe County. It's, pretty big county, very wilderness, a lot of woods, a lot of forest and everything over there. Yeah, but I don't know anything about a story of anything about somebody losing their life in an explosion over there. But from the way we're talking here and the way that we've kind of put this thing together, there were a lot of explosions that took place in different things, but we never really heard that much about them afterwards, correct?
Well, this came to us from a listener who said, this would be a good story to tell. And I look into it, and yeah, it seems like it's a good story, but it's kind of short, just a little bit of information. But as I kept looking at it, turns out that this incident that happened there was an incident that happened all over the country for like 30 or 40 years. And we'll get into that more as we get into this podcast. And that's probably why there wasn't a whole lot on this particular incident. But actually, two stories that we're going to tell. Torrent is the first. There's another one from up around Marietta, Ohio, that we're going to also touch on a little bit as well. But in general, we're going to talk about the reason why that there were these explosions going on.
You know what? I'm going to tell you this too. I love it when our listeners find a story and they relay them to us of something we haven't even heard of, or it may be something that was really popular in their family or around their location, and then they share it with us. I can't say enough about some of our listeners.
Yeah, we appreciate that. And folks, if you've got a story that you'd like us to tell, let us know. Send us something in the comments below, or send us an email at storiespodcast@gmail.com. We'd be more than happy to see what we can find for you. Okay. You ready, Rod?
I'm ready.
Well, let's get into this. Monday, April 8th, 1919 was just another workday at the Home Torpedo Company in eastern Kentucky. And Rod, in case you're wondering, the torpedo in the company's name doesn't have anything to do with naval warfare. What it has to do with is oil and natural gas. These torpedoes were developed right after the Civil War, thanks to Colonel E.A.L. Roberts, a veteran of the Civil War. He came up with a method of fracturing rock to release more oil from oil wells, what you and I'd call fracking.
Well, Roberts' idea was to drop nitroglycerin down oil wells to fracture the rock and release more oil. That sounds like something that's been going on today, but this was 100 and some years ago, okay? He applied for and he got a patent for the process in 1865, right after the end of the Civil War. Now, he formed the Roberts Petroleum Torpedo Company and started marketing iron shells called torpedoes, filled with nitroglycerin, which lowered into wells, and then they detonated to break up rock and boost oil flow, increasing the value of the well. Well, this wasn't just a new idea, because before Roberts' nitroglycerin torpedo, oil men used black powder or even just dropped some dynamite down a well, sort of the same thing of what they used to do back here in the mines in central Appalachia. But that tended to collapse the borehole and ruin the well. The nitroglycerin torpedo was more precise, more powerful, and, you guessed it, more profitable. But it was also much more deadly, wasn't it, Steve?
It was indeed. And of course, nowadays they just use hydraulic fracking with water and some chemicals that go down there, and under pressure it does that. This practice was with the nitroglycerin, and as you know, nitroglycerin is highly unstable, which kind of gets to the point of what we're talking about here today. Well, Rod, here's another strange historical twist. The same month that Mr. Roberts got his torpedo patent, a famous actor was wrapping up his failed attempt at striking it big in the Pennsylvania oil fields. His Dramatic Oil Company, yeah, that's the name, botched a fracturing attempt and folded. And with the end of the venture, this actor set his sights on another goal: assassinating the President of the United States. And John Wilkes Booth succeeded at that, for just a few weeks later, he mortally wounded President Abraham Lincoln at Ford's Theater in Washington. Now, by the 1870s, the torpedo industry exploded, literally and financially. Competing companies sprang up. Patent disputes clogged courts, and boomtowns like Titusville and Petrolia became scenes of wealth, fire, and grief. Which, Rod, brings us back to April 8th, 1919 at the Home Torpedo Factory in Torrent, Kentucky.
Okay, Steve. 4 men were working at the plant that Monday afternoon. C.E. Kilmer, known as Elba, 42, from Bolivar, New York, Arch Goodwin of Louisa, Kentucky, who was 40 years old, Charles Best, who was 30, from Indiana, and 21-year-old Carl Hudson from West Virginia. The day was going as usual, well, until around 4:15. That's when hell came to eastern Kentucky. 1,000 quarts, that's 250 gallons of nitroglycerin, went off in the Home Torpedo Factory. It was enough to flatten the building, shake the bones of a town half-mile away, and yeah, that's exactly what happened.
Now, the company was young, barely 18 months old, but it was part of a booming, dangerous business, making high explosives to boost oil and gas production in that part of Appalachia. The 4 men at the plant were killed that day, but they weren't found in the wreckage of the building, nor were they blown to pieces like you might expect from a blast like this. No, they were found together, huddled in a group about 60 feet from the storage building, having run for their lives as fast as they could. Now, see, they apparently had seen the cause of the explosion and tried to get away, but were unsuccessful. They did, though, get far enough away to not be disfigured. Hudson, the youngest of the men, had only been on the job a week. 1 week.
Well, Steve, investigators who examined the bodies believed the 4 men died from the shock wave alone. It's possible. Their bodies were face down, close together. Their clothes were torn to shreds, faces and hands cut and bruised. But they were still recognizable, almost as if they had been running, then suddenly stopped by a wall of force. But here's a surprise. Just nearby, on a rock ledge not far from the factory, another 420 quarts of nitroglycerin sat, completely undisturbed by the massive explosion. You heard that right. Over 100 gallons of nitro just sitting there untouched. A freak accident, or maybe it was a freak miracle.
Well, speaking of freak miracles, there was a visitor to the plant that day. Turns out a friend of one of the workers had come by to set for a spell. He left shortly before the blast happened, which saved his life. But to this day, nobody knows exactly what caused the explosion, leaving the full truth buried with the men. No one else was in the building, and there were no survivors to explain what went wrong. In the end, the Home Torpedo Company estimated $10,000 in property damage, or around $185,000 today. The factory, well, it was reduced to dust. The residents of the town of Torrent, half a mile away, felt the blast shake their windows, but fortunately nobody was hurt.
Well, it wasn't the last time Wolfe County would hear that kind of boom. A little more than a year later, on June 30th, 1920, another explosion made headlines. This time, it was a wagon loaded with 600 quarts of nitroglycerin being transported. And you know, I can remember back watching television in the day in the 60s, and I could remember these wagons hauling nitroglycerin. And of course, this was Hollywood. And they were like, "Oh, we've got to be careful. We've got this nitroglycerin back here. If it shakes too much, it'll send us all up before it's over with." Well, this was actually going on June 30th, 1920. The wagon belonged to the Cumberland Torpedo Company, a new company. That company had been sold to the Home Torpedo Company, and they had adopted the Cumberland name. So same company, different name, but I'm afraid we're going to have a same kind of outcome here. 2 folks, Jack Arnett and George Hughes, were hauling nitroglycerin from Lexington to a magazine near Beattyville. They were supplying the big sinking oil field. They were on a rough patch of road when the wagon overturned, and you guessed it, boom. The blast vaporized the wagon, it vaporized the 2 men, and it vaporized 6 horses. The explosion was so loud it was heard for miles around.
The only other injury in that blast was to General Manager George Kirkley of the Lee Kent Oil Company, who just so happened to be at a pumping station 300 yards away. He was seriously injured, but he survived. Now, this was all part of the risk of doing business back then. See, the demand for oil had skyrocketed during World War I. Prices were climbing, and companies were using more and more nitro to force oil out of the ground. Every one of these torpedoes was a gamble, and hauling them over unpaved mountain roads, storing them near a well, and setting them off, all steps were things that could go very, very wrong, and they often did. And Rod, I did a search on newspapers.com for the phrase nitroglycerin explosions between 1870 and 1930, and I turned up more than 178,000 newspaper stories.
Really?
Yes.
Wow.
And the vast majority of those involved torpedo accidents around the United States. Explosions at factories, wagons, wells, entire families killed, towns rocked. Rod, why don't you share another one of those tragic stories?
Okay, here we go. On September 6th, 1900, the Marietta Torpedo Company plant exploded. It leveled the factory, stripped trees bare, and blasted fruit from nearby orchards. Oh my gosh, I can't believe that happened. But the shock of the blast was felt in Marietta, Ohio, and residents there thought it was the end of the world. A team of horses was killed in the blast. The driver was saved when he went for a drink of water at the moment the blast went off. Yeah, I guess he properly did the thing of he ducked, but he didn't cover it, so at least. But anyway, that wasn't even their first explosion. Another one happened just 15 months earlier on June 13th, 1899, leveling the plant and killing 2 men and several horses. Now, like we said, this was a dangerous business. There's this long, bloody history of nitroglycerin in America's energy story. In Butler, Pennsylvania in 1889. Again in Marietta, 1911. Titusville, Pennsylvania, 1871. Roane County, West Virginia, 1914, where a man was reported to have literally had his flesh stripped from his bones by the blast. And the saddest thing of all, in Fraser, Kentucky, a father and his 5 children were killed when a can of nitroglycerin one of the children had found at a nearby plant exploded when the child began to drum on it. Whoa. Okay, and there are thousands of other stories, too, out of these 178,000. Far too many, numerous for us to tell in this one podcast.
Yeah. You know, men risk their lives every day hauling those explosives down dirt roads or working in factories full of volatile chemicals. But starting in 1949, a new era in oil and gas fracking began. Hydraulic fracking, by using high-pressure water and chemicals pumped into wells instead of explosives. The last nitroglycerin torpedo, though, was used in May of 1990 by the Otto Coupler Torpedo Company in Pennsylvania. So there you go, a very explosive story, I guess.
Well, you know, the thing that surprises me, the last one was used in 1990. That kind of surprises me. But we go back, and I start thinking of all these things about nitroglycerin. Cartoons used to make fun of it. I know you remember some of the, I think it was maybe some of the Bugs Bunny, Yosemite Sam. They would make fun of things like that. It's been on other cartoon shows. But, you know, and like I mentioned earlier, some of the old Westerns, they would have these things and so forth. You know, I'm just surprised, and honestly, I'm surprised that we didn't have terrorists get into this stuff. Of course, again, it's hard to transport. It's hard to keep safe until the moment that you need it. But this is just unreal, all this stuff about the whole thing about nitroglycerin. And to think, those of you that have any kind of heart condition out there, you're putting a tiny drop of nitroglycerin under your tongue to help settle your heart down. Now, that's a miracle in and of itself. It's a good thing that that's not powerful enough, or, gosh, it'd blow your head off, wouldn't it, Steve?
Well, I think those types of nitroglycerin, it's so small it probably wouldn't do anything
Right.
other than just affect your heart. But yeah, don't you think that all these stories that you've seen on these old Western TV shows or the cartoons that you mentioned probably came from all these stories? I mean, if there were that many stories about this going on, that was probably pretty common knowledge at the time. And so, that being so, that's probably one of the reasons they looked at that as stories for the television and movies.
I know this will sound probably silly. Let me ask you this. Have you ever taken a nitro pill, ever put a nitro pill under your tongue before?
No, I've not.
I have before, and I've done it because of the fact of it helped me at one time get the belch out that I needed to from having heartburn so bad and just, not being able to really enjoy myself at sitting down and eating and so forth. But I'm going to tell you something. That little pill, you may not think it had much in it, and it didn't. But God, the headache that I got after that, man, I have never had a headache that bad in all my life after taking. And it says on the bottle, it says it'll give you a headache if you're not careful. And it's just like, it's incredible to know that something that tiny could be so helpful. And then we're talking about this being helpful, at least in the oil fields and so forth. But gosh, the results, if it wasn't handled right or something going wrong, they were very, very deadly.
Yeah. And that hydraulic fracking is a bit safer, although, as you know, it has its own problems with chemicals maybe getting into groundwater and things like that. But still, at least you don't have explosions going on all the time over fracking up in Appalachia or anywhere else in the country, for that matter.
Well,
this is just one of those stories that, you think it's going to be just a small story about some big thing that happened in a town. And then when you look at it and dig, it turns into something a whole lot different and a whole lot bigger.
wow. I thought about this too. We talked about how much damage dynamite did at Jellicoe in a previous podcast. This is wild, just hearing all this stuff. This is just incredible.
Well, dynamite is just nitroglycerin with some other chemicals that make it a little bit more inert and easier to handle. So the power is still there. It's just the fact that, whereas you have what happened in Jellicoe, which is took a train car to smack into another one to set it off, all you had to do is just kind of knock a little one off to the side and boom, you'd have the same effect.
Wow. Well,
Yeah.
at least we can be thankful of one thing. We know that Sheriff Andy Taylor and Barney Fife handled Jimmy the dynamite-eating goat really well when he chewed up all that dynamite.
Absolutely. And folks, that's the story of the nitroglycerin explosion at Torrent, along with the widespread use of nitroglycerin in fracking at the turn of the 20th century. Another one of the stories of Appalachia. Thanks for listening. Now, you can find our audio podcast on Spreaker, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. And if you'd rather look at us, I don't know why you'd want to do that, but you can. We're right here on YouTube. Be sure to give us a thumbs up if you like our stories and click that subscribe button too. Till next we meet, y'all take care. So long, everybody.
So long.